Nambezho, Bendigan, hello and welcome. Maku Neshnabe Maku Odom Bodo Adami and Dao, Ogimao Sawek, and Gibi Jayan Mampi. I introduced myself and I've welcomed you all here. We're in this great place of South Bend, Indiana, also in our language known as San Bono Donic, Ribbon Town, the town of the ribbons and where we traded along the banks of the St. Joseph River. We're here tonight to introduce to you the concept of what Thanksgiving means to us and also dispel some stereotypes and offer a cultural awareness and showcase our alliances that we have built over this past year in our movement. This is still an extension of our earlier round dance rallies and rallies that were in a process to decolonize Mishawaka. I'm Jefferson Ballew, also known as. I was born here in Mishawaka in 1973, left after the blizzard of 78, and returned after I graduated high school to learn about who I am as a Potawatomi person. And as we come here tonight, part of our goal when we first started this decolonized Mishawaka was to make those shared colonized spaces sacred again. That's why Madeline and we chose the Central Park, where two main ideals were there representing a falsity, both the Princess of Mishawaka and the idea of Christopher Columbus being some type of hero and innovator of new times being found in the New World. And for both were lies, the one being a complete falsity. There was never a Princess Mishawaka or a Chief Elkhart that was from the Shawnee tribe that came and left her here. And again, Christopher Columbus was a rapist and a murderer and a colonizer. Not this emancipator of people and explorer of great things. And so we wanted to keep in true form with that. Our last round dance and rally that we had was at the theater there, and that's a place where we get a chance to express ourselves. So coming full circle and trying to make those sacred spaces or those colonized spaces sacred again, we wanted to come here to the Civil Rights Heritage Center. And with me here, we have our host, Dr. Darryl Heller, who's the director of our Civil Rights Heritage Center and assistant professor of our Women's and Gender Studies. And I'd like to introduce and hand the mic over so he can explain to you about the center and about who he is and what they do here in our community.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brother Ballew. So I'm Darryl Heller. I direct the IU South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center. Some of you know this story and why this is a civil rights center, but I want to, for those of you who don't, I want to give just a brief history of this space that we're in. It's a very important space and for this community. This building was constructed in 1922 as the Ingham Public Natatorium. Now, for me, I had to look up the word natatorium. I had no idea what that was. Like many Black folk, I don't swim. But what I learned is that it's a fancy name for indoor swimming pool, and this critically as indoor. It was in 1922 when it was built, it was the largest indoor swimming pool in the state of Indiana. And despite the fact that it was a public facility built with tax money from all of the residents of South Bend, including the African-American community, it fully excluded South Bend's African-American community for the first 14 years of its existence. Black people in this city could not walk through the front door, much less swim in the water. And that was true for 14 years, but the community didn't take that lying down, but continued to fight and agitate and push for their just rights to be able to use public spaces. In 1936, the city needed to do some repairs in the building. 1936, as you know, was the middle of the Great Depression. So in order to raise the funds, they recommended leveraging a special tax assessment, taxing everybody in the city a slight amount to do the repairs to make it a functioning facility. The African-American community rightly said, we are not paying additional taxes for a facility and space that we cannot use, and took their case to the state tax assessor's office and won their case. They looked around, and this is the era of Jim Crow, where separate but equal was the law of the land was ruled constitutional in 1896 with the Plessy v. Ferguson ruling. But the state tax assessor looked around and said, there is no separate or equal space. There's no other facility in South Bend, so that they said that the city had to make some accommodations. But the tax assessor also said that they did not have to integrate. So what they did was, for the next 14 years, this indoor swimming pool operated on a segregated basis, allowing people of African descent to use the facility 1 day a week, a day known as Colored Day. It was on a Monday, and that was the only day that the African American community could use this space. So the fight continued for another 14 years until 1950, when the pool was fully integrated. But we know that changing laws doesn't change hearts and minds, and we still get older African Americans who come into this space and talk about their experiences in the 50s and 60s, where they were allowed nominally to use the space at will. They also say that they didn't feel particularly welcome. Stories abound such that group of Black kids coming to the pool behind white kids, the white kids come in. When the Black kids get to the entrance, they're told that the pool is full and that they have to come back later. Those kinds of stories abounded and continued here in South Bend. And that fight for justice is part of what makes this space what it is. The building closed in 1978. It was old, there were other facilities, and it laid just as a vacant, abandoned building for the next 30 some odd years, until a group of IU South Bend students, faculty, community activists, community organizations recognized that this building represented one of the local symbols of the civil rights struggle here in South Bend, and recognized the historical nature of that and the symbolic nature of not demolishing it as the city was planning to do at the time, but to use it as a space that had once excluded and segregated, but to transform it into a space that's inclusive of everyone. And so it was rededicated in 2010 as the IU South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center, where it now functions and serves as a vibrant hub of community activism. Our keywords actually are what we do is we do education, we do culture, and we do activism. We have speaker series, we have film series, panel discussions. We collaborate with different progressive organizations that are working towards social change and justice. And we provide the kinds of educational resources and lectures that allow the kinds of conversations that we need to be having across issues. What we've generated here is a safe space where difficult conversations can be had. The kind of conversations around race, around sexuality, around gender, around the environment, around relationships between groups like Jefferson Ballew and myself, the Black and Indigenous community, the Black and trans community, that those are important, critical dialogues that have to happen if we're going to transform the world and the society that we live in into the one that we want our children and our children's children to grow up in. And so that's our task. And so I'm just really pleased that everyone is here, that everyone is joining in this conversation with us. And we're all going to kick some knowledge together, and we're going to learn some new stuff. And we're also going to have a chance to talk. People talking together that the powers that be would much rather not be talking to one another. And so that's our mission, that's our goal, and that's something that will continue. So thank you.
Thank you, Darryl. So again, as we come back, we want to also explain a little bit about what we're looking at and what we're trying to do at the same time. So we're trying to integrate our intellectuals, those individuals that are policies within our tribe, within the structures that are creating and disseminating information, and those that are out on the street, our street warriors. So bringing those intellectuals and those street warriors together, both having the same purpose, the same message, and the same cause, but different avenues, different roadways to get there. And so we want them to start having those discussions around each other again, in a safe place. This was exactly why we wanted to have, be able to broadcast from this location because of the change that it has sparked in its community and the success that it has had. For a couple years, Darryl and myself have been sitting around the barbecue, different restaurants, running into each other, trying to get together and bring this together. And we're looking forward to more of these to come. So as we come back to our event here, I'd like to introduce to you one of our first speakers, Mr. Sam Morsall. He is an enrolled citizen of the Bokagan Band of Potawatomi Indians. He has over 20 years of experience dedicated to Indigenous education, strategic planning, and cultural immersion. Sam continues to advocate for tribal nations by promoting educational sovereignty through government-to-government capacity building. Mr. Morsall received degrees at the Northwest Indian College and Evergreen State University, focusing on Native American studies, education, and public administration. Sam spent 10 years as the Kent School District Indian Education Title VII Program Manager. As the fourth largest school district in Washington State, Mr. Morsall advocated for over 500 urban Native K-12 students from over 80 different tribes. Through these efforts, Mr. Morsall was elected as the chairman of the Western Washington Native American Education Consortium, where he was selected representative to the U.S. Department of Education Urban Native Listening Session on Improving Indian Education. In 2014, Mr. Morsall returned to his ancestral homelands to begin advocating for the Indigenous students of Michigan. In addition to serving as the Director of Education, Morsall also served as chairman of the Confederated Michigan Tribal Education Directors and lead panelist to the National Indian Education Association 2017 legislative update on implementation of Every Student Succeeds Act. Previous president of the Tribal Education Directors National Assembly, Sam currently serves TEDNA as the leading expert of data sovereignty with tribal education departments. I'd like to welcome my friend and brother, Sam Morsall. Please, it's your turn to share.
Bonjour. Thank you, Jefferson. Thank you to the Civil Rights Heritage Center, and thank you to our hosts, Madeline and Darryl and Jefferson. It's an absolute honor and pleasure being here. I want to give kudos to Jefferson for that wonderful long introduction. All that basically means is I care about kids, and I've cared about kids for a very, very long time. And recently, I joined the revolution because I saw what was happening with the systems, both in the public school setting and the tribal education setting, and what is happening on the grassroots level. And I was totally amazed and had to follow my passion in terms of having these subject matter experts tell their story. Because across the board, whether you're in a public school setting, private school setting, or a tribal school, and not necessarily the tribal perspective and that individual thought, that individual feelings are talked about. So when you talk about Indigenous education, and it dates back when all students were gifted and talented. We were identified as gifted and talented. Each citizen, each student in that tribe had a role and responsibility of that tribe. And it was our duties as community members to cultivate those gifts. And so when you label somebody as a teacher, it's within our community that we're all teachers. We all have something to share. We all have something to give. And you're seeing that more and more every day. We're right around the corner of Thanksgiving, but we're in the midst of this global pandemic. And what has helped us throughout is our communities coming together and seeing where those truths lie. And that's what the Indigenous experience is about, and that's what a tribal experience is about, is being able to form those bonds with our community members, no matter the distance, and sharing the knowledge that will keep us safe and warm and healthy and make the decisions for the future generations. So, I spent a good part of my life, both in the public school setting and more recently in the tribal setting. And the funny thing is, as more as you get individual advancement, you lose touch of why you started. It's being in touch. It's being in that classroom with the kids. It's being able to share that sacred knowledge. And it came to a point in my life where I was battling those systems of trying to make best for what was not only for the students who are in the public school setting or our future generations or the future of our tribe in terms of sustainability, but how do we get there? How do we get there with the limited resources that we have? How do we get there with this pandemic that has been going on? So I saw what was going on is as systems started to falter. You see that in the public school settings with the distance learning. You see all this money being poured into systems trying to help the teachers or trying to help with PEP. But what it comes down is you're teaching those students in the classroom. That classroom is now your home. And that's where it has always been for Indigenous people. Because the education that we have been receiving in the public school setting, or, is not that, or oral storytelling that we've heard. And that there's no greater understanding than that act of Thanksgiving. Just recently, I heard on the news that the president is endorsing a patriotic education. And that's in response to all the civil rights, the civil rights statues being taken down, trying to increase funding or decrease funding for those schools unless they're teaching that patriotic education. And I cannot think of one singular event other than what we're teaching over the last 100 years about Thanksgiving that leads to that. Because there's really, if you think about it, probably four main points timed in Thanksgiving. There was a 1621, the original Thanksgiving. 16 years later, there was another one. And then in the 1700s and 1800s with Washington and Abraham Lincoln. So those were like four Thanksgivings. I'll get in that a little bit later, but I want to get back a little bit to that Indigenous perspective. And everybody's heard that story of the Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims, but not many people have heard that story of Tisquantum. Tisquantum is somebody who was 20 years old, and he was on the coast, and he's looking out and he sees this big boat comes up, and they've known those boats for hundreds of years, and they would trade, but no one has made an establishment. So Tisquantum went out on that boat with four other guys, and he was taken back to England. Then he was able to get back in 1614 and came back to his people, and then he was kidnapped again and taken back.
Oh. Frozen.
Do you want to?
Sam, that may be, I'll go ahead and send him a message.
That was getting really good.
Yeah, figures.
Maybe he logs off and logs back in, and then maybe we could just move on to the next and come back to him.
Sure.
'21st century technology.
Sorry for the mishap here. We'll go ahead and go on to our next speaker once Sam gets logged back in here. Just a moment. Go ahead and get caught up here myself. So again, thank you for this opportunity. And this is one of our first interactions that we're doing with these. So of course, the technology is going to be a part that we have very little control of. And so as we continue to tell our story here, I'd like to introduce our next presenter. I'll kind of put Blair up there right now at this time. I'd like to introduce to you Blair Topash Caldwell. She is also a citizen of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians. She is currently the Public Humanities Fellow at the Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian Indigenous Studies at the Newberry Library in Chicago. She's earned her PhD in the anthropology at University of New Mexico earlier this year. Her research interests are in indigenous futurisms, climate change, science fiction, traditional knowledge systems, and indigenous counter mapping. So I'd like to invite everybody to welcome Blair here to this at this time. Blair?
Miigwech. Thank you so much, Jefferson, and miigwech to everyone for allowing me to share this space with you all. Your attention and your contribution later with the more organic Q&A section of this roundtable panel type discussion. So yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Buju Jayak, Blair Topash Caldwell, Indigenous, Minam Kokwe, Neshnabe Noswin, Udwewa Mikwe Nadam, Minimukono Dodem, Bianchi Mijiganak, and Doch Bia Mine Chicago Nak and Dada, Newberry Library, Ejimikchewian. And so basically just introducing myself and to the audience, but also any of our relatives who have walked on, who are here with us, listening to the words we share with each other, making sure that they can understand. So that's why we use our native language, because that's how they understand us. And like Jefferson said, I am a citizen of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians, but currently living in Chicago, a place we call Chicagoinak, or a place of wild leeks or onions. And indeed, even though I was asked to talk about Potawatomi constellations and Indigenous astronomy, I think the thread that kind of ties it all in is this idea of counter mapping. So we live in a settler society that's ensconced in narratives of American patriotism and the first Thanksgiving and whatever that means to be American, which usually has never included people of color, let alone Indigenous nations. So yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen because my presentation, I think, lends itself well to visual examples. So I'll go ahead and do that. All right. And so I do have a PhD in anthropology, but I feel a little bit like a charlatan because it's not like my PhD is in astronomy or physics or anything like that. In fact, the way that I sort of got involved with this topic is through some projects of counter mapping, things like reclaiming certain places throughout the Great Lakes region. I'm interested in Indigenous science, or what's often called traditional knowledge systems, as we'll probably be talking a little bit about Indigenous philosophies related to teaching and learning, where our knowledge systems are often seen as sort of quaint folk knowledge instead of legitimate science. And so when I started this journey about learning about our constellations and the very rigorous sort of science that's embedded within these stories, my interest just grew and grew. And so I was a little bit lost for how I would integrate this conversation under the topic of Thanksgiving, truth and lies. But again, I think what the thread that binds us all is this sort of alternative narratives of belonging, of place naming, of occupying space. So without further ado, I'll go into this very short sort of presentation, and hopefully it will be followed by a lot of Q&A. So I think it's always important to acknowledge your teachers and knowledge keepers in the room, as well as those who are not in the room. So here's a very brief list of folks who have contributed to how I come to understand Neshnabe constellations, as well as some of the teaching materials they have done the work to produce, or folks I've just learned from peripherally. So as I mentioned, I'm really interested in this idea of counter mapping. Jefferson has already brought up the issue of Mishawaka and this myth of Princess Mishawaka, as well as Elkhart. And we might see these as sort of innocent alternative stories around place. But in my research, there's a very political reason why these narratives, even though people know that they're false, why they're deployed. It's because it creates a sense of legitimate placemaking for settlers. And Thanksgiving and these idea of nationalism does the same thing. So it is actually very harmful to Indigenous peoples because it erases the archives of knowledge that we have contributed to for thousands of years in that place. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of place names, and all of these place names describe things of that landscape, activities that were conducted there, sometimes named after important Indigenous leaders in our past. And so when you erase that history and you attribute some other mythical story, it dispossesses us of our traditional properties yet again. So I see in a similar way that you can look at the map as a sort of cartographic, like archive of knowledge. I see constellations in the sky as another form of map. So another way that it describes our place names And stories essential to our knowledge systems and ways that we understand ourselves and our place in the world and in the universe. So very briefly, this is a very broad brushstrokes explanation of the Neshnabe universe. It's a lot more complicated than what I'm going to explain, but just to orient our audience who may be unfamiliar with the way we see ourselves in the universe, there are at least 3 levels of the Neshnabe universe. One is the sky, which is embedded with sky beings and Thunderbird and a lot of sky medicine and stories around the sky. And on the opposite end of that is the underworld or the water world, which is represented by totally different kind of opposing medicine and different spirit beings. You see one on the right here of Nambezho, which is sometimes referred to as underwater lynx or underwater panther. It's also represented by the element of copper. And finally, in the middle of these 2 worlds is the realm that humans occupy. And so all 3 of these realms are connected by a cedar tree. And so that's also a really important medicine in our culture. And I won't talk about all the things that it's used for, but just know that it's an important element. And so before we get into the very specific constellations that I pulled for today's very brief presentation, we can think about the sky or the stars as memories. So it's a pattern of memories, of thoughts made by the creator. And the story goes that Gtthëmnedo, and if you break down that word Geshe or Kache, it means large or big or grand. And Menedu is often translated as spirit. So you might have heard of Gtthëmnedo, which means like great spirit. For Potawatomi, we pronounce it more like Gtthëmnedo. You might have heard of like Manitou Lake or Island or Spirit Lake. And actually for us, Menedu is a lot more complicated than spirit. It literally translates to entity that goes about causing change. Because when we pray and we ask for things, when we put down tobacco, we are asking for the assistance of the Menedu book to help assist in this change that we're asking for. So Gtthëmnedo is more of like this grand original spirit being that created the universe. And so the story goes that Gtthëmnedo sent out his or her thoughts into the universe. And it just kept going and going and going. And these thoughts wouldn't return to this entity. And so Gtthëmnedo called them back finally and was like, return to me. And this is a very short version of the story again. But what those thoughts and those prayers and those good memories left were marks in the sky, which became the stars. And so getting right into the thick of it, this is a star map that was created by another Potawatomi or Pokagon citizen, Kyle Malat. He is a language specialist in the Department of Language and Culture. And he was able to organize some of the Potawatomi constellations that we were learning of into this very legible map. And so the way it's oriented, and you can think about the sky as a sort of dome that, depending on the tilt of the earth and the time of year, oscillates. So you see different constellations at different points in time and different directions. And instead of just organizing it based on the Western concept of months, for which we also have months or what we call moons, he organized it along the medicine wheel, because the medicine wheel is associated with different directions in the sky. For example, yellow is east, but it also represents springtime. And if you can think about yellow and spring and renewal as a sort of indigenous logic system around newness, I guess, and beginning and starting. And that's where the sun and all the celestial beings come up, is from the east side. So there's a ton of like logic embedded in these reasonings. And so this is a very simple explanation of some of these constellations and where to find them. And also my son just started crying, so I'm a little bit distracted, but that's what it's like with social distancing and trying to participate in these meaningful conversations, but still, you know, have a family. So yeah, as I was mentioning, the medicine wheel is broken down into these different directions, which also coordinate with different medicines and actually different stages of life, such as elders, infants, teenagers, and adults, etc. So the first constellation that I sort of wanted to point out is one that you can see in the fall, because it's fall time and maybe you want to actually go out and see these things. So as I mentioned, the constellations all have stories attached to them. In this case, it's moles nickels. So a lot of you may not know that the term moose actually comes from Anishinaabe Moan, which is our language. And the way we would refer to it is moles or moso. And we do have a constellation for that. Here's a very like woodland native style rendition of a moose. And so actually, let's go. So if you think about like why we would see moose in the sky at this time, because it's a representative of an ancestor that provides moose meat, which is a typical traditional meal for us, and as well as shelter and clothing. And so as it starts to get colder in this time of year, we really have to start thinking about these items, and I don't want to say resources, but really start doing our best to prepare for the really harsh winter ahead. And so just going back to, you might have heard us call ourselves Anishinaabe or Neshnabe. And so that's usually translated as like the original people or the true humans. But there's this aspect of the word that refers to being low or lower down. And so there's a couple of interpretations within the community about this. One is that we are the lowest beings or life force on the earth, and that the earth could live actually without us. And indeed, Mother Earth would be a lot better without us because of the harm that humans are doing to the planet. So that's one interpretation. The other lends itself to one of our creation stories, which talks about Anishinaabe peoples being lowered down from the sky world. Specifically in this Pleiades constellation, which is my favorite constellation because it's this beautiful swath of stars. And you can usually see about 6 or 7 of them on a clear night. And you can see it tonight if you want to. So for the Ojibwe, they call it Buganagijik, which literally means hole in the sky. So that lends itself well to this idea of being lowered down from the sky world. And so getting close to the end here, another constellation that you can see just peeking up over the eastern horizon at about 8 p.m. Eastern time near South Bend, Indiana, is Wintermaker constellation, and stories associated with that obviously have a lot to do with wintertime stories and stories that are only told when snow is covering the ground. And if you look directly ahead of you, up the kind of like zenith of the sky directly over your head at about 8 o'clock tonight, you'll also see the Moose constellation as well as Ajijak, which is crane. So I'm just breezing through this really quickly because I want to make sure we have a lot of time for the other participants to talk, as well as have more organic conversation. So there's so many more stories that I could go into about this, but I'll just leave you with one, just one more. And that's this constellation that you see closer to springtime or late winter, early spring. And that's Nambezho, which is the underwater lynx that I mentioned before. And so some people call underwater panther, but what you need to know is just that it's a powerful water entity. It exists in the rivers and the lakes and associated with whirlpools. And if you are in a community and Indigenous peoples, as we were, that travel a lot through water, our streams and rivers are our original highways. It can be really dangerous in certain areas of the water, and there is a very real threat of capsizing or drowning. And so you have to respect this spirit through offering tobacco or sema or saying prayers. And just to remind you again that there are these two opposing medicines, the sky world, the water or underworld, and the realm that we occupy. And so you can see this constellation in the early spring, as I mentioned, and there's a very specific reason why that is. If you think about the early spring in the Great Lakes region, that it's a very dangerous time. It's still very cold. The water is very cold, but the ice is starting to thin. The water can be very treacherous in certain areas, and the ice in certain areas can be very deceptive about its thickness or thinness. And so there's a very real threat of death. And so in a particularly dangerous part of Lake Superior, maybe some of you are familiar with the pictograph on rocks up there. And one of them is a picture of a horned, scaly being that is supposed to be Nambezho. And it's here as another perspective of that same pictograph. And it's possible that the original artist was trying to communicate something about the dangers of that particular area, because it can be very deceptively calm in that area of Lake Superior. But then at other times it can be really tough waves, like smashing you up against a rock. So again, just leaving this sort of symbol as a very complicated archive of knowledge in order to warn other Anishinaabe peoples that might be traveling through there. And so I'll just wrap it up now. And if we want to talk more about other constellations, I'm that. But the point I want to leave you with is just that what I see this conversations around constellations contributing to this discussion is just this idea that there are alternative knowledge systems, that there are alternative narratives to what we see both in the sky and on a map and in our day-to-day lives. And so it's not in the interest of the settler colonial state to honor those alternative knowledge systems, because it's a direct threat to settler sovereignty. Indigenous sovereignty is a direct threat to settler sovereignty. And so, as Jefferson mentioned, we are here to share with one another in a very dynamic way between different ethnicities, different knowledge systems, and I'm really happy to do that with this conversation. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Blair. I appreciate it. And that was the exact point that I wanted to make by your presentation, is that there are alternative narratives, alternative knowledge. The myths that are out there are not only our myths, but are also their myths, and they're being miscommunicated and misunderstood. And so we wanted to showcase our intellectual knowledges and our cultural intellectual abilities too. So thank you again for being here. Give your son a big hug and appreciate your sacrifices you make for our community and your family. Thank you. At this time, we did have some technical difficulties, so we're going to open the mic back up to Sam Morsall to finish his presentation on Indigenous education forms. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Jefferson. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So when I was giving the presentation, my laptop decided to blow up on me. It does not start again. So this is a new one. I'm actually testing out new podcast equipment. So creator works in mysterious ways, I suppose. So hopefully I'll have the video up soon where I can start doing laptops, but testing out a new mic and excited to be here again. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but it really talks about being able to come together, and I'm very thankful for Blair to come in and talk about knowledge systems, and that's really about what we're talking about is Indigenous sovereignty, for sharing that Indigenous perspectives. I'm not sure if she shared the Crab Nebula of 1052, but that's intimately related to the Anishinaabe migration story. So when you start piecing together the oral storytelling and the oral traditions to historical dates and things, you start to get a clearer perspective. And you're seeing that over and over again, whether it be different snake mounds or Cahokia or Clovis Point or Kennewick. Indigenous beliefs are continually being proven over and over again. That we were here much longer than what the Western concept is. And so when you think about those westernized educational settings, you think about the Industrial Revolution, and really the classroom hasn't changed much over 100 years. You're still in rows, you're still getting grades, you're still taking test scores, and that was designed by the Western system to start that Industrial Revolution, to get people acclimated to the the factories and those types of things. But the creativeness, those indigenous following your passions, I think really starts from the home, and being able to share those stories through our language, through our oral traditions, or just sitting around the table and sharing stories about, what mom and dad did or what grandma and grandpa did during that time. And so when I go into classrooms, I think about how do we bring that knowledge base to the next generation, especially in systems that maybe do not want to promote it or bring awareness to it, especially with this patriotic education. So you think about, what does it feel like to be in those times? What does it feel to be like on the coast of the 1600s, seeing these ships come in, being kidnapped twice, finding your way back, and seeing 9 out of 10 of your family members or your tribal community has died because of disease, and then what do? You're 25 years old, and we're going back to Squantum. You're 25 years old. Your whole tribe has been decimated. You don't know where to go, so you shack up with a neighboring tribe, using the tools that you've learned, because you've been kidnapped and because you've been seen Europe and made your way back. You've picked up certain things on your path. You picked up the English language, and then 1620, the Pilgrims, the Puritans come and they land, and there's this opportunity. They landed in the dead of winter. It was in December when they first landed. So that first struggle, I think there was 100 people on that ship. 50 of them died before that spring. And we're talking 600 years ago from basically today. We're in mid-November. A month from now, they would have been landing 600 years ago. And what does that look like? So their winter was hard. I think they said that there was 100 passengers, 50 of them died. But what did they do that following spring? Tisquantum went over and then started helping them, looking them how to make their crops and share their crops. And they had such a bountiful harvest that they decided to party for 3 days. The first day, they didn't even invite the Native Americans. The reason the Native Americans came to that camp was because they were the Puritans were selling or shooting off guns in celebration of what a bountiful harvest. So now you have 90 warriors show up saying, what the heck is going on? Why are you shooting guns? We're not in the greatest of relations right now. Things are tense. And then that's when they went out and got the deers and the venison and brought in the eel. And it wasn't necessarily out of, thank you so much. It was more of, how do we negotiate between a colony or an establishment, a town or a village, and the tribe, the powerhouse tribe that has several other different tribes that they're working with as well, both friendly and aggressive. So it was a little bit, that one day was a political come together. But then you think about the next time that we celebrated Thanksgiving, or the Puritans did, was 16 years later. And that was in celebration of the massacre of the Pequot tribe. So they're celebrating the total decimation of people. And the way that they celebrated was a day of silence and fasting. It wasn't until 1789 where Washington made the proclamation. So when I go into classrooms and I talk about the history of Thanksgiving, and it's nice to give those dates and times, but it's also about, where is that tribal perspective? So in 1789, where were the Pokagon people? Where are the Potawatomi people? Where are the people of the St. Joseph? What was Washington trying to do when he made that proclamation? Was it about the brotherhood between the Native Americans and the American colonies? Was it no, it was about establishing good relationships with the Native Americans, because we were signing treaties left and right about maintaining our traditional homelands, maintaining our food supplies, maintaining our trade. So from 1795 all the way up until 1861, Potawatomis were one of the largest signers of treaties. So when Washington made that proclamation in 1789, the United States was a fledgling country, looking to make peace with not only Britain, not only New France, but also the Native American tribes. So again, that was another political move by the United States to do that. And then lastly, you think about 1863, when Abraham Lincoln made the official proclamation, and that's 1863. Okay, so now we're talking about the Civil War. So again, it's about bringing that brotherhood together. So each time that Thanksgiving has been celebrated during those 4 points of time had different intentions, but none of it was about the friendliness of the Native Americans. And so I think that that's important. So then when we get into the Industrial Revolution, in 1900s, that's when, Native Americans were being assimilated, sent to boarding schools. So again, it's a way to shift that narrative about how great America was in terms of, the Western expansion, the manifest destiny, but it's not necessarily sharing that tribal perspective. And so that comes all full circle to where I'm at today. For so many years, I've gone into November was my classic month where the tribes would go into local schools and talk all about Native American history and regalia, and we'd have government to government trainings. But when you're still in that system where you're not using the gifts that have been given to you, a lot of barriers are in place because our subject matter experts may not have degrees, but they have that real life experience. How do you get a degree in a language that is not certified at the college level or the university level? How do we foster that? It's through the love of the people that have. And that's why I'm so excited about these days and times. Yes, it is a pandemic. Yes, we are in a rough road ahead, but we're beginning to rely on the things that have lasted us for generations. It's being able to make those interpersonal connections. And I believe that each and every one of you are here because you want to learn and you want to listen and you want to share in that experience. And so to me, it's a lot easier to talk in front of you because I know that you care and you want to know the history and want to provide your insight on it as well, rather than going into a classroom and fulfilling a lesson plan or a standard. So again, I appreciate the opportunity. 1,000 apologies for not being able to provide a long, consistent, uniform message, but we're here to learn. And again, I thank you so much. And I would love to hear what you have to say about your experiences with Thanksgiving and how do we come together again. So miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you very much, Sam. Back in 1990, President Bush signed a joint resolution declaring that November would be National Native American Awareness Month. So again, with November being that awareness month, we wanted to also take this opportunity to also bring awareness and also take that time and recognize the efforts of a Republican president doing something good for us at this time. When we look back into history, we can look at a few different presidents that have really been there for us, so to say. Richard Nixon signing the Self-Determination Act, President Carter signing the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act in 1978, which is the most important act because we wouldn't be here sitting here today speaking about these issues, holding our eagle feathers, singing our songs. We had to have a special law stating that we could pray to our Creator and use our language. This was in 1978 and again reaffirmed in 1994 with the definition change of Indian to Native American. And so we want to look at those presidents and really appreciate what they've done in the Federal Register of Law. It may have just been in the spirit of doing, but we also really want to make sure that that's understood. So coming now, our next speaker, I want to take this little time to introduce Mrs. Madeline Weesaw. She's also an enrolled member of the Pokagon Band Potawatomi tribe, and she's an activist in the group of AIM, the American Indian Movement for the state of Indiana, representative for that. Recently, Madeline came to me with tobacco earlier this year and asked if I would help her bring attention to the problems that were happening here in the Michiana area. And it's been a far long time that I myself have been part of protests and rallies, mainly because I was still raising children and grandchildren. And I've always been afraid of bringing that type of attention to my family. So I give a lot of kudos for the strength and bravery of this young lady who is raising a family as well and being a street warrior as well. So at this time, I'd like to give the floor to Miss Madeline Weesaw.
Bonjour, Madeline Weesaw, Indigenous, Michigan, Dodem, Pokagon Potawatomi, Wazaki Kondochbia. Hello, everybody. My name is Madeline. As Jefferson said, I am Pokagon Band Potawatomi. I live in St. Joseph, Michigan. I do have a young son and a family that I'm raising here. And that's kind of what really, I guess the birth of my son is what really kind of lit that fire underneath me, so to speak. Because growing up, and we have like a phrase for this in our Indigenous communities, we call it walking in two worlds, because as Indigenous people, we really are in this situation where we are, in a lot of cases, forced to pick between this colonized way of living or this way of living that is more organic and natural to us as Indigenous people, because these two things oftentimes collide. And I think back to being my days in school when we would speak about days such as Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, and hearing it felt a lot like propaganda to me, because the things that I'm being taught, I understand it. I know that these things are not true. But when I bring up the point that actually that's not how these things happen, I'm, called a liar, or I'm disruptive, and told to kind of keep my mouth shut, and that's not my place. And I think that's really, I don't want to say ironic, but it's almost fitting that that's the response that we get from our education system when we do try and point out the facts and the reality of living in this country as an Indigenous person. Because when you think about the Thanksgiving holiday, it really is propaganda designed to make colonizers feel more comfortable with the things that they've done to claim their place in American history. It's not necessarily designed to tell the truth or to educate anybody. It's really designed to make other people more comfortable with the suffering of Indigenous and other people of color. So as Sam had pointed out, there was that feast in 1621, but there were also throughout history a whole slew of events in which Indigenous people were massacred. And it's not just warriors and grown men going off to war and dying in battle. This is defenseless men and women and children and elders who are being massacred in the name of progress and in the name of manifest destiny. And it was often the case after these massacres that there would be days of Thanksgiving, where people would celebrate the atrocities that they had just committed against innocent people. So you really, and it's interesting because this is a conversation that I've had with Indigenous people throughout my lifetime, is you try to pinpoint the origins. When was the exact first Thanksgiving dinner? And Indigenous communities across the country all have their own stories of times when their people went through these horrific events and then watched as the colonizers celebrated and gave thanks to their God and to each other for what they had just done to our people. And so, excuse me, when you really think about this period of time between Columbus Day and Thanksgiving and the holidays in general, while much of America is celebrating, Indigenous people, we're viewing this as people are literally celebrating the deaths and the massacre and the genocide of our people. And so, in our school system, about the only education that people receive about Indigenous people is as it relates to colonizers. So Thanksgiving and, the Mayflower and Columbus. And this is done deliberately. It is a deliberate attempt to erase Indigenous identities. And excuse me, for 500 years, Indigenous people have really been fighting for that recognition, and not just a recognition of the things that we've been through, but we have to fight for the recognition to be viewed as human beings and contributing members of society. As Blair and Sam had pointed out, Indigenous people we have so much knowledge, we have so much that we can contribute to society, but society has this narrative of Indigenous people almost as being like cavemen, being savages who were lost and needed the help, and we needed white people to come and save us from ourselves. And the reality is that's not true. But if we point those things out, if we share our history and the things that we know to be true, that is damaging to the narrative that the United States government has really taken an effort to push out to make themselves feel more comfortable and to feel like they have a claim to this land, and we do not. And when we talk about Thanksgiving, Indigenous people, inherently, we are grateful people. That's one of the things. that is so strong throughout our communities is to be thankful for the things that we have. So it's not to say that we shouldn't be celebrating the good things that we have, excuse me, in our lives. But we need to stop pushing this narrative of the friendly Indian who saved the pilgrim and then everybody held hands and sang kumbaya, because that was not the case. And oftentimes throughout history, whenever Indigenous people did show mercy or charity or sympathy or empathy towards the colonizers, we were murdered for that. So it's really important to acknowledge those things when we're talking about this time of year, because this is really a time of mourning for a lot of Indigenous people. And I think that when we talk about Thanksgiving in modern times, it's really important to acknowledge the occupation of Wounded Knee in the early 70s. This was really the first time in modern history that the general American public became a little bit woke, so to speak, to Indigenous issues where they couldn't really ignore it. Because I think also when we have conversations like we're having today, or when we protest things like Columbus Day and you know, the atrocities that have happened in America, we're told, well, why wasn't this a problem until now? And it's not that it wasn't a problem until now, it's just that people are just not hearing about it. It's getting a little bit harder to silence Indigenous people. And this occupation that happened, at Alcatraz in the early 70s was really kind of like the catalyst for the modern Indigenous resistance that we see today. So there was around, I think it was like 80 something people, 78 or 80 Indigenous people who went to Alcatraz, which according to a treaty from 1868, that was surplus federal land. It was no longer being used by the federal government. So Indigenous people had a right to appropriate that land. And so this group of Indigenous people went and they sarcastically offered to pay the United States government $24 in beads and blankets, which is what the United States government paid Indigenous people for the island of Manhattan. So they went and they occupied Alcatraz for around 19 months. And during this time, Indigenous people, we are resilient and we are resourceful. So even though the island itself didn't really have, you know, fresh water or electricity, we found ways to make that work because a lot of Indigenous people were already living in these sorts of horrendous conditions on reservations that the United States government had forced us into. So this was not an obstacle that we could not conquer. So the Indigenous people went to Alcatraz and they set up school systems and a clinic, and they had kitchens, and hundreds of Indigenous people came and lived there for around 19 months before the federal government finally said, well, enough is enough. It's time to get those unruly natives out of there. And there's a lot more that goes to that story, obviously. And I don't want to take up too much time, but eventually after 19 months, the last Indigenous resistors were removed from Alcatraz. But what we've seen after that was people, and not just Indigenous people, but people from all walks of life who were becoming aware and who were starting to understand that maybe the things that we were being taught in school were a bit ludicrous. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't, you know, the friendly Indians who, you know, moved out to make room for the settlers and who, you know, were so happy to show the colonizers how to survive. And it was all sunshine and roses. It was not that. It was genocide. And there's not really another word for it aside from genocide. And so what we've seen at the occupation of Alcatraz was that it really kind of forced people to re-examine these things that they had been taught throughout their lifetimes. And people, for the first time in modern history, were starting to become upset, and we're starting to seek out knowledge. Like many of us here today are here to seek out knowledge. And so Thanksgiving, the holiday that we have today in America, for a lot of Indigenous people is a day of mourning. So it is a time to be thankful for the things that we have, but it is also a time to recognize the things that have happened to our people historically so that this country could be made great, so to speak. And so when I talk to people who are not Indigenous about Indigenous history and the way that this country came to be, I think there's always kind of a part of me that gets nervous because I don't want to offend or I don't want to trigger somebody. That being said, I think that is also a symptom of the erasure of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous identity in this country. And I think it's a time for Indigenous people to stop worrying about being polite, to stop worrying about who we offend and to become a little bit stubborn and be very adamant in the things that we know to be true. Because there's no one who's going to come along for us, who's going to demand justice for us, who's going to share this knowledge for us. It has to come from Indigenous people. And excuse me. And when I see everybody here today who is not Indigenous, who wants to learn, I'm really filled with such a sense of hope, because it doesn't feel so much like I'm talking to a brick wall anymore. And so I did want to take a moment to thank everybody who's here today, who's willing to hear us out and who's willing to share this knowledge with others. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Appreciate your words and your ambition and your indomitable spirit to protect our future generations. It's much appreciated. You've heard us talk a little bit about AIM, the American Indian Movement. And in the 60s, it was a call from our grandmothers to go out and protect our women and our children who were being beaten by the police in the streets of Minneapolis and other cities. And so when we look at the alliances and the associations that we've made throughout our history, again, one of those groups is the American Indian Movement. And it has played several different roles throughout history, both positive and negative. And we want to acknowledge that throughout history. In the social change of becoming sober in Indian country and on the reservations, that was also a problem within our group of AIM. And we've now taken it to this next level of being able to teach our children about our culture, our spirituality, our language. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Lance Soto, who is also a representative of AIM in one of our associations in our southern states. When we talk about the Anishinaabe, those of the Great Lakes Basin all the way into the Ohio River Valley, this is our relations from that area. Lance, welcome.
Thank you for having me on here. I'm really learning a lot. I didn't know people could like do the PowerPoint presentations on that, but that was kind of neat. And Blair and Sam and Madeline, those are some tough people to follow, you know. So I'm gonna do my best. I'm a Cocopah Indian, you know, and my people are from the California, Arizona, Mexico region, all the way down to the Baja, down to the Sea of Cortez, you know. And you know, while people on the East Coast were dealing with invaders in the 1600s, we were dealing with them since 1539. You know, so we kind of share the same story in that, you know, to where like we don't recognize a good relationship with these people, you know, and despite how many times we try to pity them and to help them along and help them be kind to each other, you know, we're almost foolish in that sense, to where we expect different results. And I think that that's easier for people to understand now, living in the 2020 and the way we like treat each other now. So this is kind of a sore subject like that within a lot of Indigenous communities, and here in my home with my children, you know, because they all go to school and they're all at that age. And well, I mean, I have a grown child, an almost grown child, and two small boys. And so we've all had this conversation about Thanksgiving, you know, and I'm always the one, you know, daddy ruins Christmas, daddy ruins Thanksgiving, you know. So but yeah, so this is where we are in 2020, you know. And I'm thinking about the culture that was here before us, especially in like this area we're in right now, this like tri-state area. This is Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, you know, and there was a culture of people living here, the mound builders. And this predates everything, you know. I mean, since the beginning of time, these people were here, you know, and they actually made mounds. And we've been discussing that locally, kind of like what that mound means. What does that mound represent, you know? And that's our relationship with our grandmothers and our mothers, you know, the place from where we all come from, that womb, you know. And we've been kind of looking at the similarities with that. And then also there's a on the 21st there is a there's two planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Like for the first time in 400 years, they're going to be lined up, you know, in that way. So we're going to be out there at those mountains this year to kind of see what happens. You know, the last time that happened was in 1623, which is around the time we're all talking about here. You know, so anyway, that's about all I have. Thank you for having me here, and you guys don't feel guilty about sharing a good warm meal with yourselves and with your family and with your children. You know, there's nothing wrong with us sharing a meal with our family and our community. Well, I guess now because of COVID, that's bad, but you know, I hope you guys have a good meal. You know, oh yeah.
Miigwech, thank you, Lance. When we think about this time, especially for those of us who are this side of the Mississippi River, from the east side to the east coast, when we talk about November, it's also a very spiritual time for the Anishinaabe people of the Great Lakes Basin, Ohio River Valley. This was known as the Ghost Supper time. In the early beginnings of November, after our harvests, we would have feasts, ceremonial feasts that would honor those that have recently passed and those that we referred to as the Gtthëmnedo, the ancient ones, the ones that were here before and will be here again. And we had different political systems and structures, and we had what was known as banishment for crimes. Certain crimes, you were banished from the community. I cannot live without my community, but my community can live without me. And that was the worst thing to have happened, was to be banished from your family, your clan, your nation, and having to go live on your own without the comfort of your community. And in these times, we would have what was known as spirit houses that were on our grave sites. And these feast foods would be put into these spirit houses. And it was commonly known that at this time, during these cold months, that was the way that we served our banished criminals during this hardship when there was no food available. They could go to their clan's grave side and those grave houses, and they could eat that food that the family has put there. And so even though we had these laws that kept them away, we still showed social grace and social empathy by the utilization of our ghost supper. We look at the Six Nations people, and they have the ghost dance, where there would be days and days that they would go on for the ghost dance. And the same across the Mississippi with the Lakota people on that ghost dance. And when they were dancing to bring back those ancestors, we believe that every child reborn to us is an ancestor returned with ancestral knowledge that will help us better our seventh generation from here at this point in time. And so again, when we look at November, we look at that period of time was a very sacred and special time. That when those colonizers came, they came at a time when we were at our most mournful and the most giving. At that time, we would give away as much as we possibly could, not to only show our gratitude for our bounty and our harvest, but also so that those food stores wouldn't go to waste also during the winter time. And again, we were able to feed our homeless, those that were banished, and that chose to be away from our communities. So another little insight as into that spiritual realm, not only the politics and the social realm, but that spiritual realm, that was what was going on as these invaders came. At this time, in the spirit of showing that unity and reaching out across this great land and those alliances that we need, I'd like to introduce to you at this time Paul Misher and Jerry Casey from Michiana National Alliance Against Racism and Repression. I'd like for you individuals to share your stories and how that we've come across our paths and are making each other stronger. Thank you.
You know, I have to say, in terms of Thanksgiving, this program tonight is like a huge table of amazing foods that you're sharing with us. And I think everybody here probably feels the same way, that it's a very important, it's a feast, it's a gift, you know? So I just want to say a few things about us. I took notes on what everybody else said. It's so great. Well, let me tell you, the Michiana Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression really appreciates Madeline's gracious invitation to include us in tonight's discussion. We bring greetings to the panelists and to everybody here. Michiana Alliance is just 4 months old, created in consultation with Black Lives Matter South Bend in the midst of the huge national upsurge triggered by the racist police murder of George Floyd on May 25th of this year. We've participated in the round dances and the protests in Mishawaka. And actually, some of us actually were testified at the Common Council in the victorious effort to have South Bend claim October 12th as Indigenous Peoples Day. We haven't yet defeated Columbus Day, but first things first, right, Madeline? It's great. So we've been working with the Indiana and Kentucky chapter of the AIM since our beginning. Now, we're part of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which is a multiracial coalition formed 47 years ago in 1973. 1973 was the year of the Wounded Knee occupation on Pine Ridge Reservation in North Dakota, initiated and led by the recently formed American Indian Movement, which was founded only in 1968 in the city of Minneapolis, that was also the same city where George Floyd was murdered 52 years later. Now, just as Madeline and Jefferson are now working with the Michiana Alliance, back in 1973, AIM was one of the founding organizations of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Clyde Bellacourt, one of the co-founders of AIM, was on our national board and national executive board when it was founded in 1973. Now, the Alliance joined the tens of thousands of people and organizations who sent funds, material aid, and people to Wounded Knee. The National Alliance organized educational campaigns and material aid drives in every city in the country where we had a branch, which meant we brought the message of Wounded Knee and AIM to people who had not been incorporated in that kind of framework or consciousness before. Now, it's also true that the National Alliance focused on the legal defense of AIM activists and leaders falsely arrested and trumped up charges. A lot of our work at that time was focusing on trying to get political prisoners out of jail and trying to keep activists out from being arrested. For those AIM people in prison, the Alliance steadily fought for their liberation. Our legal defense teams were really very intense and often successful, but it's a real uphill battle, you know? So the battle continues today as Wounded Knee veteran Leonard Peltier remains incarcerated 47 years after the occupation of Wounded Knee. Now 76 years old, Peltier resides in a maximum security prison in Florida, far away from his North Dakota home and family. He is struggling with serious health problems at this time, for which he is being refused adequate medical treatment. There is a worldwide campaign for Leonard Peltier's freedom. Still, he remains incarcerated, and still he remains politically active. So here I would like to point out that learning history and incorporating Native people's understanding of history is super important, but it's not enough. We have to have action as well. And one thing I would suggest for Thanksgiving, this very complicated, contradictory holidays, perhaps we could all write a letter to the prison, like everybody else does periodically, to demand the freedom of Leonard Peltier. And I will certainly put that to Madeline, the information on that, and we can get it out between us on the different mailing lists. So what I like about this is the panel tonight reflects the inclusive vision of Madeline, Jefferson, and other people in the AIM chapter of Indiana and Kentucky. Because the panelists here are leaders of the Native American movement, holding important offices and directing important campaigns. And, you know, we need to, and we want to learn from you and join your challenge to the established Thanksgiving narrative. The year 2020 marks exactly 400 years since the Puritans landed on Plymouth Rock in 1620. The same racist white settler mentality and policies pursued by those self-righteous Puritans are still in effect today. This is the source, the root of social problems within Indian communities: high unemployment, poverty, poor healthcare and housing, and substance abuse, and stolen lands. The US government and multinational conglomerates in the private sector continue to violate and ignore Native people's land rights. Greedy corporations backed by the government bulldoze through long-established treaties to steal more Indian lands and poison that land and the people living on it through mining, fracking, uncontrolled pollution, and the dumping of toxic waste. Educational policies combined with media portrayals of Native people, TV, in films, advertising, etc., to create a narrative that reinforces efforts to promote self-hate and hopelessness among Native peoples in the United States, especially youth. So this evening, we're learning more about the real Thanksgiving. And yes, we in the Alliance, we recommit ourselves to continuing learning that history and to integrate the current campaigns of resistance and cultural affirmation into our struggle against racism and political repression. The warped, distorted, and absolutely false white settler manifest destiny ideology was used to justify genocide, brutal colonization, and forced removal of Native peoples from their lands, as well as the government policy of reservations, destroying Native culture, elimination of Native languages, and the forced removal of children from their families and community to attend so-called Indian boarding schools, where direct attack on their culture was drummed into the children's heads. I mention this because these are the same practices being used today against undocumented immigrants held in ICE detention centers. Another example of the solidarity that has happened is AIM. Why did AIM rise up in 1973? There's some information to suggest that it was about inspiration that people had from what the Black Liberation Movement was doing, the mutuality between those two movements. And another thing I want to share with you is that Thanksgiving Day is called the Day of Sorrow in Boston, Mass, where I'm from, Paul and I are from, because groups of people always gather at Plymouth Rock in order to challenge the dominant narrative. See, Boston was always proud of our story. We were kind to the Indians, unlike those crazy thugs out west. We had a moral superiority, which was completely contradicted by the fact that even many New England abolitionists, believed in Indian removal because they believed in manifest destiny, that notion that white settlers had the right given to them by God to conquer all lands between the Atlantic and the Pacific and to dominate all the nature and all the people living on those lands. So, to get that. Anyhow, we in the Michiana Alliance are extremely fortunate to be able to work closely with Madeline, Jefferson, and other people in the Pokagon Band and Potawatomi tribe. The solidarity we're creating goes beyond the Alliance commitment to defend Indigenous people's rights. We're creating a solidarity that's mutual through a consistent exchange of ideas, energy, and vision. From their example, we're learning from Madeline, Jefferson, and others how to maintain our dignity, stay politically active, and remain determined to win vital battles when our enemies seem all-powerful and the path to victory is long and hard. Black Lives Matter and the 22 millions of us who have mobilized in the streets and cities across the US since the racist police murder of George Floyd on May 25th of this year, we need to study and be inspired by the history and current reality of Native people's resistance. And we need to act in solidarity. Standing with you as examples, as teachers, and as comrades in struggle helps to guide us, and it provides nutrients to our movement and to our personal lives. So with that, I really want to thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I've always enjoyed your passion, your compassion and empathy, your knowledge base, and always promoting the wellness of human beings in general. So I appreciate that.
Thank
Paul,
you.
at this time, if you'd like to share some words, we'd appreciate that.
That's fine. This represents us.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, as we've reached out to other groups, we couldn't be here where we are today without the progression that Black Lives Matter South Bend has made for us. Again, in the 60s, we also jumped on the same bandwagon, so to say, when Black Panthers made their movement. AIM jumped onto that, and that's because of the numbers. When you look at the numbers of the population of Indigenous people in the United States of America, you're talking about under 3 million people as federally recognized card-carrying Native Americans and federally recognized tribes. We have another 3 to 4 million that are self-identified through the census. So our numbers vary anywhere between 2 to 5 million within the United States of America. Through this election, you've just seen us listed as something else at 6%. So our numbers have risen since the 90s from 1 to 2% to now 6%. And again, we've always taken that opportunity to support our Black and brown skinned brothers and sisters. We have to remember that through treaty and through reparations, it is the true ownership of land that has been transferred from the Native Indigenous people and also the Black slaves of America. They will continue to kill people of Black and of colored skin because we are the true landowners. We are the ones that are rightfully inherited to the United States, both North America, Canada, Central and South America. We have always believed here in the Americas that we are one continuous water source from the Great Lakes Basin and the Mississippi River down into the Rio Grande and into the Gulf of Mexico and into the Amazon. Our cultures, our waters, our food, our medicines, our creator and creation are all connected in that way. And we've always taken this opportunity to, with other groups because of our low numbers in population and their success in eradicating and our people to go ahead and help us. We need that help. And so it's my great fortune and opportunity to have met this individual, Jordan Geiger with the Black Lives Matter South Bend, and to welcome him here as part of our family and our loved ones, and to please share his story at this time. Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, Jefferson. Jerry pretty much touched on a lot of what I was gonna bring up already around just our movement work and how we've tried to build solidarity in reaction to state-sanctioned violence against our peoples. As Jefferson mentioned, my name is Jordan Geiger. I'm born and raised here in South Bend, Indiana, and I'm a member of Black Lives Matter South Bend. I've been very active in the community over the last 4 years since returning to South Bend from graduate school. I'm really trying to do grassroots work to counteract racist and political repression here in our St. Joe County. And I'm especially happy to be here tonight because I think this is just very important work. Going back to my undergrad years, when I first learned about decolonization, I'm reading the work of Fanon and Sandy Grande and a number of other scholars. Hopefully you can still hear me. It says my connection is a little unstable right now, but really thinking through, for years, I've just thought through like, how can we build Black and Indigenous solidarity with the understanding that we have to be intentional about how we go about doing that. And so just looking at the number of uprisings this summer and seeing that so many Indigenous people across the country came out in defense of Black lives and to show solidarity with Black lives, especially in the Minneapolis area around the death of George Floyd. I knew that when, or we knew that when we saw Madeline and Jefferson and other representatives of the Potawatomi Pokagon Band or Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi out in Mishawaka protesting the Columbus statue, we knew that we had to show up and express our solidarity. So it's been incredible for us to work together over these last several months. And I hope that we continue to build on that work. Black Lives Matter as a global network is very much committed to taking the land back, to the restoration of Indigenous practices and Indigenous rights, which is, as we know, is a very problematic term. I mean, I've always, since reading Sandy Grande's work, I was always so moved by, there was a line where she talked about how different minoritized groups in the United States often fight for rights and equal rights, but those rights will never truly be extended to Indigenous people so long as we occupy their land. And that has stuck with me. And I fundamentally believe, and I know that the BLM Global Network believes that none of us are free until Black and Indigenous people are free. And we have to talk about and work through what that freedom looks like. Our peoples have been organizing together for hundreds of years. I mean, dating back to Wolof and Taino rebellions in the Caribbean against Christopher Columbus and his kin. And that history has carried on. And folks have mentioned the work of AIM and the Black Panthers, and we really came together. Those two movements really came together around the issue of police brutality, which still plagues us to this day. We know that while you know, African Americans or Black people are overrepresented when we look at extrajudicial or officer-involved murders. We know that we're overrepresented. You know, we're 13% of the population, but we make up about 32% of these folks who are murdered by the police. But we know that our indigenous folks, our indigenous kin, have higher rates of police brutality. We know that we fight against environmental and systemic racist oppression. As we look at the fight for clean water, right? I mean, we see what's happening at Standing Rock. We can connect that to what's happening in Flint, Michigan, right? Where folks are literally fighting still in the 21st century in the supposedly the most developed place in the world or country in the world. We're fighting for clean water. We see it as we all fight for just access to good and clean, affordable housing. We know that, you know, indigenous folks are having to, you know, leave the reservations because of the harsh conditions there, and having to move to different metropolitan areas of cities. We're still they're faced with, you know, rising, you know, prices in housing, with living in poor and dilapidated housing. And that's an experience that Black people that we share here in these United States. And so I know that, you know, our peoples are trying to find a way where we can, you know, work together to reimagine and build a new world. And we have to come together to really understand what that looks like. And I often think about that in the context of South Bend. When I first moved back here, I was kind of struck by the fact that there was all this discussion and excitement around this casino that was being built, and that this casino would essentially serve two purposes. One, of restoring indigenous land rights, superficially perhaps, and then two, that it will be, you know, a revenue generator for the city. And there's this specific fund that I can't think of the name of it, where I think 5% or $1 million of the revenue that is generated will go to the city of South Bend, whichever is greater. I don't remember the exact details. I can't remember if it's the Pokagon Fund, but I know that there's a lot of the diversity and inclusion funding for the city of South Bend. A lot of some of that money comes from this particular fund. And it just kind of struck me as problematic that, you know, essentially we're trying to justify the taking of indigenous money, right? Like, by couching it in this idea that we're trying to build a more inclusive South Bend, that we can use this funding now to create various inclusionary projects for Black people. So part of that is like funding, you know, a green space out at you know, the MLK Center. And I think all of that is great, like, right? Like, we need access to clean, you know, and healthy foods in our Black and brown and low income communities. But should that be done on the backs of indigenous people, right? Like, what does it mean for a city that has stolen this land, and in an educational institution, Notre Dame, that has stolen this land from indigenous folks, to now say that, well, you know, we're going to help, you know, other groups of people who we've deprived of rights and of humanity in this area, and we're gonna do that by siphoning revenue from the peoples upon whose land we survive on today. So you know, it's just a lot that I think that we have to work through, and I'm just happy that we've been able to find each other in light of these uprisings, and I'm just excited for the work that's to come. I don't have a fancy a presentation or anything like that, but I'm very much committed to land restoration for indigenous folks, and to fighting against colonial oppression. I was so moved. One of the biggest things that moved me this summer was seeing, you know, the Sunrise folks with decolonized Mishawaka banners. And I remember we did that chant, death to colonialism, death to capitalism. And it was just moving for me because, you know, in other spaces in other parts of the country, I've been able to like engage in those kind of chants, but not really here in South Bend, or in the South Bend area, South Bend, Mishawaka area. So I was happy to like be home and to be able to name the system of oppression that we face, that is, or the systems of oppression that we commonly face, which are capitalism and colonialism, and then also going into discussion about sexism and the gender violence against indigenous women. So thank you all for having me here, and I'm excited for the work ahead.
Jordan, that was as fancy as it needed to be. We know your dedication and commitment, your indomitable spirit to help our human beings. So we appreciate you being here and being a part of our family. As a little bit of a clarification, when we look at the presenters that were here from the Pokagon Band of Potawatomis, we weren't here representing the tribal government and or the casino administration. We have a dual citizenship where we are federal citizens of a tribe, but also a state citizen. And so we're all here representing our own self-interest, our own theories and ideologies. Although we are citizens of that nation, we are not speaking on behalf of our administration or our council or our casino. I would like to have that clarified. Many of us have or have worked for or been employed. I'm a previously tribal council elect, so I've served the government, and I've also worked on protecting burial grounds and sacred and ceremonial lands for the tribe also. But again, in our proper titles, we're here as citizens concerned about the humanities, concerned about our next seventh generations. And so we really wanted to make that clear and understanding as far as the separation of a citizen and the political entity of the tribe. A lot of times people will hear a Pokagon band member talk like myself on TV or Madeline, and they think that may express the express ideals of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and the government, which is completely false. Many of our citizens have different views on politics, social interaction, cultural rejuvenation. Many of our tribal citizens and the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi are very assimilated and Catholic based. Over 80% of our community is non-traditional. The ideals that Lance, myself, Madeline, Blair, and Sam present, we are the minority of the minority. We are the less than 2% of our communities that hold the traditional knowledge and integrities. And at times we are held accountable at a higher level and also at a lower level at times also. So I just wanted that to be very clear with the affiliation to tribal governments, that we are here in the hopes that as human beings we better ourselves and we can be the example to our governments and be those leaders that will show the differences in how we make those things clear. Again, I want to thank everybody who has been here, both as presenters and as participants. We are very honored to hold your attention this long. At this time, I would like to hand the floor back over to Darryl if you'd like to have any closing comments or wrap up this section. And if there is any questions, by all means, please put those out there for us at this time. Thank you. Miigwech.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Jefferson, and thank you to all the speakers and presenters tonight. The bringing together folks, who, again, someone put into the chat, bringing together folks that the powers that be would much rather are not working and talking together, are not organizing together, are not building a movement together. And that it's incumbent upon us, and this is what's, I think, important about one of the things that we're doing tonight, is that we learn that history, what many people said, that we have to learn the history. And learn the history as it is, not as it was taught to us, because we all learned the misinformation. The history of Thanksgiving, the history of Columbus Day, the history of Flag Day, the history of the 4th of July. The 4th of July that they called Independence Day was not an Independence Day for Black Americans. It wasn't an Independence Day for Indigenous people. It was an Independence Day for white people, and particularly rich white people. I mean, I must say it that. Poor white people also were not independent. So, we need to continue these conversations. And as the director of the Civil Rights Heritage Center, I'm just very, very honored to be able to host this, to be a participant in it, to join together with all of you as we continue to build for a brighter future for all of our children's and our children's grandchildren. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity again for our family, our clan, and our nation to present this information. We look to our families, Jordan, Black Lives Matter, and the alliances that are here Jerry and Paul, we appreciate everything you've done for us. Lance, in those travels. At this time, we'd like to offer a closing prayer that all of our families are safe and well as we've gone a little bit of away from them and left them to fend for themselves. We look to our Creator, and we are grateful and thankful for the bountiful blessings that we have been gifted here throughout this year. And we look forward to the blessings and the family alliances. And again, we appreciate everyone that has been here with us at this time and throughout our rallies. Madeline, appreciate your indomitable spirit. And everybody here, George, our tech support in the background, appreciate you. Brother Sage, it's good to see you out there again, and all of you individuals who are out there that I know your faces and haven't seen in a while. Miss and love you, and sending hugs and blessings to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Peace.
To all my spirit brothers and sisters, welcome to existence.
Thank you, Brother Sage.